Beyond the Pines by Dorian J. Sinnott. A labyrinth of trees were all they came to know. But yet, the branches that covered the orphanage windows were nothing in comparison to the endless forest surrounding them. The last few leaves of the year let in the only light that trickled down from above, but the rest of the woodland was shrouded in shadow and silence. The only sound that would rise up, deep in the night, was from beyond the pines. An ancient, long-forgotten spirit who promised blood for freedom. Enoch, the eldest, denied such a thought. Freedom from the forest would come from wit, instinct. But as the days grew longer and blended together, he soon began to realize that perhaps the spirit was right. Perhaps the only way to free themselves from the long-lost paths was to give in. Give in to the shadows. Give in to the forest. And give in to death. Death was no stranger in the maze of trees. Though winter made him weak, the inhabitants of the forest knew better. He was hungrier than ever when the snow blanketed the earth, leaving no source of life for him to feast upon. Animals took to their dens to hibernate until spring, and he would only be able to leech from the few passerby. But the forest saw no visitors this season, and death was beginning to starve. That is, of course, until Enoch and Acorn came along. Acorn scuffed his feet through the fallen leaves and thin layer of snow that coated the ground. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets to try and keep warm, but the dropping temperature made it harder. The orphanage only had a small supply of winter clothes to begin with, and a second-hand coat certainly didn't do as suffice a job as it could. Noticing his brother had been falling behind, Enoch stopped. "Can't you go any faster? It's getting colder out here," he jabbed. "I told you we shouldn't have played out here. I told you we should have stayed put. It's your fault we're lost." "I'm sorry, Enoch." Acorn kept his head and voice low, picking up his pace only slightly. Being exposed to the elements the past few days with no real means of warmth had been taking its toll on him. On both of them. He could feel the fever starting to rise, and his occasional coughs had become more frequent. But it wasn't just the coldness from the air that he'd been feeling ill from. He'd seen so much change in his brother since they became known to the forest, his tone being the main thing. Enoch was always so soft-spoken and caring, but lately, in the week or so that they had been wandering aimlessly through the wood, he became bitter. He had been full of hope and promises to Acorn, playing the role of his father when he needed it. But now, there was nothing left in his words but anger and defeat. "Do you think anyone's looking for us, Enoch?" Acorn asked once he was at his brother's side. "Us? Highly unlikely. I doubt they've even noticed we've gone missing," Enoch said. "Face it, kid, we don't have anyone who misses us. We're stray dogs as far as they're concerned. Two less mouths to feed." Enoch looked up to the canopy of branches that hung above them. A few flakes of snow began to fall from the graying skies. He sighed. "No one's looking for us, James." Acorn flinched. He hadn't heard his name, James, spoken in so long. Enoch had always called him Acorn, for as long as he could remember. "You're like a little acorn, falling not too far from the tree." Although 5 years apart, the two were inseparable. Mainly, Acorn from Enoch, but even just the same. The younger wanted nothing more than to be just like his big brother, and so the name stuck. Only their mother and father had used James, and even then, it was only to be formal. But since their passing, he rarely heard it, not even from the caregivers at the orphanage. That was another thing, Acorn told himself, that was lost to the wood. "Now let's keep moving. We can't be too far from the main road now, or at least the town or something." Enoch started ahead once more, leaving Acorn standing on the path as the snow continued to fall. It took him a moment before he too sighed and followed along behind his brother. The shadows of night fell deep upon the clearing where the brothers stayed the night. They huddled close together, using their bodies as warmth. The snow had died down, but it didn't keep the cold from creeping in. The temperatures of night were far lower than day, and death prowled the forest with craving. It was Enoch who heard the voice first, slipping in through his dreams. "Why do you keep holding on to hope, dear boy? You've said it yourself. No one is looking for you." "I made a promise to my brother," Enoch stated firmly. "I swore to him I'd get him home, and that's what I'm going to do." "Home?" Enoch could hear the grin in Death's voice. "But you have no home. Only that bleak, empty orphanage to go back to. Is that what you want?" "It's one step closer to home than here." Enoch searched around himself, seeking out the voice. But all he saw was trees. Endless, branching trees. And shadow. "Why don't you show yourself? Are you afraid?" "Fear is a feeling created by the one it haunts. It does not have a physical form. I am much like fear. I am very real, but only become more prominent as you allow it." "Then I ask you to leave. You're only slowing us down." "Such a large favor from such a small soul. Surely you know why I'm here." The cold wind picked up from the west, stinging Enoch's cheek. He turned his face away from the gust, only to notice Acorn sound asleep. "You're both getting sick. Exposure to the elements. Winter is eating away at you with your hunger. It won't be long until you're begging for me, not pushing me away." "No," Enoch said. "We're not giving in to you. We're going home, and that's it. I made a promise to James, and you can fulfill that promise. Give your brother to me, and I'll set him free. I'll send him home." Enoch was taken aback. "What?" "Face it, child. Home is a lifetime away. It's a vision you two have built up and hoped for, but it will never come. How many years will you sit in that orphanage and wait? How many more days can your brother hold on without food, warmth?" Enoch heard a deep, wet cough from Acorn. "I only offer freedom, and the price is so little. Let me take the burden off your hands, and you will be free. You'll both be free." "I can't." "I promised you freedom, did I not? I can take you home. All it costs is your brother. And he, too, will be free." The dripping of snow melting from the trees is what awoke Enoch that morning. He sat up, head spinning from his dreams and the sickness that had crept upon him. He coughed once, heavy, feeling the phlegm cling in his throat. And it hurt to breathe. How much it hurt to breathe. He glanced over at Acorn, still sound asleep in the snow. His cheeks were pale, lined only with the rosiness of the cold that nipped him. "James?" There was no response. Enoch scooted closer to him, resting a hand against his brother's forehead. He was expecting it to be warm, from the fever he knew had been breaking. But he was cold. So very cold. Enoch tried to catch a whimpering breath, but it only got caught in his lungs and stung. The tears came naturally, though. "Enoch." Enoch looked back at his brother, the boy's eyes just barely open. "It's so cold. I'm so tired. I just want to go home." The wind began to blow harder as Enoch felt the tears coming again. "How much farther?" "Not much," Enoch whispered. "Not much." When evening fell, Enoch was barely walking. The cold took to him as the snow around his feet grew deeper. In his arms, he carried Acorn. When he reached the thickest part of the forest, where the branches twisted themselves in hellish form, Enoch fell to his knees. "Have you brought me what I asked for?" Enoch looked for the voice beyond the trees, but there was nothing but darkness. With trembling arms, he removed Acorn from his chest and into the snow. A thick stain of blood coated the front of his coat, and in a smooth line across the boy's neck. It was the only thing that had kept him warm. "I did what you asked," Enoch spoke softly, voice caught in the lump in his throat. "Now take us home." For the first time, there was no response from death. The trees seemed to vibrate from a hollow chuckle, but soon it was overtaken by just the wind. The snow began to fall heavy once again, covering Acorn's body as Enoch cried out, "You promised! You promised you'd take us home!" Silence was all that met Enoch. He couldn't stop the tears as he rested a hand upon his brother's forehead once more. "I promised you freedom." The voice slowly drifted in. "You're free of the burden your brother put upon you. Isn't that what you wanted?" A sharp twinge was sent through Enoch's chest at the words. Surely he had thought here and there that life without Acorn would be simpler. That not worrying about looking after him, not worrying about finding a home that they could go to together, it would make life simpler, easier. But no matter how much he wished that that fantasy was true, he knew the reality of it. Acorn needed him, and he knew that deep down,